Okay, so I'm gonna start another chapter of the books. They came for the schools, and one day I'll grow up and become a beautiful woman. Here we go. Chapter 4 of They Came for the Schools. Everything imploded. Christina Caitlin still felt as though she was living in a perfect Carol dreamland as she entered her second year teaching fourth grade at Johnson Elementary in the fall of 2019. She'd seen the news reports about racist videos involving students at the high school the previous year, but that hadn't diminished her overall view of Southlake. It was just some kids being dumb, she figured. If anything, the district's forceful and unified reaction to the controversy made her feel even better about her decision to come to Carol. Everyone seemed to be coming together and saying racism is a problem, it exists, and we're willing to have hard conversations about it, Caitlin said. But a few months into the new school year, she got an email from a parent that made her start to question whether that was true. The mother of a white student was upset about a book that her daughter had found in Caitlin's classroom library, a collection of titles that students could read in their free time. The book that had drawn the mom's anger, Blended by Sharon M. Draper, tells the story of an 11-year-old biracial girl named Isabella who was struggling with her parents' divorce and her own racial identity as the daughter of a white mom and black dad. The story includes nuanced discussions of racism and belonging, and its climactic scene depicts an encounter with a white police officer who ends up shooting Isabella as she's reaching for her cell phone. School Library Journal called the book a frank, honest portrait of a modern blended family and recommended it for grades 4 and up. That'd be a depressing book to read. The mom from Caitlin's class disagreed. In her email, she said her daughter had come home asking why a police officer would shoot someone just because of their race. Caitlin recalled, that wasn't a conversation the mom said she wanted to have with her daughter, and it wasn't a message that she wanted her child to learn at school. Later at a meeting with Caitlin and an assistant principal, the mom said she wanted the book removed. That evening, Caitlin vented in a social media post that was visible only to close friends. A parent made me have a meeting with her and my principal this morning because she said this book makes all black people seem better than white people and like victims, she wrote along with her picture of her copy of Blended. Caitlin refused the mom's request to pull the book. What kind of signal would that send to black students, she thought. That's their truth. And it's the truth of what's happening in the world. Yeah, Caitlin said, noting that black parents don't have the luxury of putting off conversations about racism until their children are older. I don't want to take it away because it made one person feel uncomfortable. Dissatisfied with Caitlin's response, the mother filed a formal book challenge asking to have Blended banned not just from Caitlin's class, but from all of Johnson Elementary's classrooms and its library. In the end, a committee that included district staff members and a parent reviewed the book and, after concluding that it was age appropriate, voted to continue and allowing it on campus, citing a district's policy that said a parent's ability to control what students can read extends only to his or her own child. Caitlin was bothered by the episode, but also emboldened. That was a big turning point for me, she said. It's not every black person's truth that they're gonna be shot by a police officer just because they get pulled over or they do something. A bunch of black criminals get arrested over and over and over again. And like I've been hearing about people like black criminals who have like dozens of arrests and convictions on their records, and they aren't being killed. So this is bullshit. She'd stood strong, and her school administration had stood with her, but major society-altering developments were on the horizon, in Southlake and in America at large. And the next time a parent complained about what children learned at Johnson Elementary, the result would be far different. And this is probably when LGBTQ curriculum comes into play. Fuck that bullshit. By early 2020, the District Diversity Council was nearly finished with its work. Each subcommittee had drafted its portion of the Cultural Competence Action Plan, or CCAP, and district administrators were beginning the process of compiling everything into a single document. All that remained was a final Diversity Council meeting in April to go over the details with the full committee before presenting the plan to the school board that May. If that's how things had played out, Michelle Moore, who would be appointed school board president that May, believes the diversity plan probably would have sailed through without much debate. In that alternate reality, Moore says the school board likely would have held a few workshops over the summer to revise and streamline the plan based on community feedback, if there even was any, and then that fall, the district would have begun the work of implementing the plan. Instead, as Moore put it, everything imploded. The implosion began in earnest on the evening of March 11th, the day the threat posed by what most of us were calling the novel coronavirus. Fuck the pandemic, it was a scam. The implosion began in earnest on the evening of March 11th, the day the threat posed by what most of us are calling the novel coronavirus became real for most Americans. That morning, the World Health Organization officially declared COVID-19 to be a global pandemic, sending financial markets tumbling. Sports fans tuning into ESPN that evening watched as an NBA arena in Oklahoma City was abruptly evacuated just minutes before tip-off after a player tested positive for the mysterious new virus. 1 hour later, President Trump addressed the nation. From the beginning of time, he said, from the Oval Office, nations and people have faced unforeseen challenges, including large-scale and very dangerous health threats. This is the way it always has and always will be. It only matters how you respond, and we are responding with great speed and professionalism. That same night, about an hour after news broke that Tom Hanks and his wife had tested positive for the coronavirus, oh brother, Carroll ISD officials announced on the district's Facebook page that they, like all leaders in virtually all of America's 13,000 public school districts, were consulting with public health experts and attempting to figure out how to keep students safe during these unprecedented times. The following week, Texas Governor Greg Abbott made the decision for them, and an edict that would remain in effect for the remainder of the school year. The Republican ordered the emergency closure of all Texas schools. That was a fucking waste of time to do that. Fucking farce the coronavirus was. Practically overnight, school hallways and playgrounds went silent as most Americans, liberals and conservatives alike, heeded calls from government officials and public health experts to stay home to slow the spread of the virus and allow time to study it. Slow the spread. What a fucking farce. From the start, Christina Caitlin said remote schooling was a train wreck, at least at the elementary school level. She started each morning by reading aloud to her students over Zoom, learning over time, as we all did, how to master the mute button. The remainder of the children's days were filled with online assignments largely curated from a pair of digital news and literary magazines published by the education company Scholastic. Honestly, Christina said, we gave them busy work. I mean, were they learning? Absolutely not. We taught nothing those last couple of months. We were just trying to get through it. Everyone was. In the mad rush to manage the crisis, the work of the district city council was put on the back burner. The district postponed plans to present the diversity plan in May and told committee members they could resume their work the following school year. But later that month, on May 25th, yet another viral video sparked a new national crisis, one that suddenly made the work of the diversity committee seem more urgent than ever. Yeah, right. Fuck diversity. When it's being implemented the way that you retards want to implement it, fuck diversity. Americans watched in horror as for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, a 46-year-old black man named George Floyd, who was a career thief and who once held a pregnant woman hostage and held a gun to her stomach. Okay? Fuck George Floyd. Doesn't matter that he wasn't doing anything super violent that day. He tried to pass off a phony $20 bill to buy cigarettes, and he resisted arrest. If he hadn't resisted arrest, he wouldn't have died. And he was ODing on fentanyl. He had almost died from a fentanyl overdose before the arrest that killed him. George Floyd was probably going to kill himself, and only retards missed that fucking asshole. Fuck George Floyd. A 46-year-old black man named George Floyd gasped for air under the knee of a white Minneapolis police officer, using his final breaths to call out for his mother. The cell phone footage of Floyd's murder hit the internet about 2 months after Louisville police had shot and killed 26-year-old Breonna Taylor during a botched drug raid, and 3 months after 25-year-old Ahmaud Arbery was murdered by 3 white men while jogging through a neighborhood in Georgia. Perhaps it was because the pandemic had everyone's emotions running high, or because the steady drumbeat of news about the killings of unarmed black men did not slow even during a global health emergency. Or maybe it was the visceral brutality of Floyd's murder. Fuck off. Caught on tape for all to see. Whatever the cause, the outcry that followed his death was different from that of earlier high-profile police killings. Within hours, the video sparked a nationwide protest movement unlike anything the nation had seen in at least 5 decades. Nikki Olale, a black junior at Carroll Senior High School, was at home in White May scrolling through videos of marches in big cities and small towns across the country when a thought hit her. Why not in Southlake? Nikki, the daughter of Nigerian immigrants, had moved to Southlake with her physician mother and older brother the summer before her freshman year, coming from its predominantly white but far more progressive school district near San Francisco. Nikki described her early years at Carroll as a shock to her system. It was lonely for a long time, she said. Now she saw a chance to make a difference. She called up a few friends and fellow members of the Progressive Activism Club, a newly formed student organization at Carroll. I was like, we should do this. We should put on a protest. And they were like, you might be crazy, but okay. That night, Nikki designed a digital flyer on her computer inviting the community to a demonstration for racial justice. The following week at Town Square, come support Southlake students and our fight to end racism and stand with victims of police brutality, it said, alongside a drawing of 3 fists raised in the air, 1 black, 1 white, and 1 shade in between. Before I continue, since we're talking about black criminals, there was a black man who, I forget what his name was, but I gotta look him up. Okay, this is from last year, so it's not super recent, but it's still fairly recent. This is from November 26, 2025, and it's about a Chicago man accused of setting a train passenger on fire had 72 prior arrests, and his name was Lawrence Reed. A Chicago man who allegedly doused a woman in gasoline and lit her on fire on the November 17th was a career criminal, the White House has said. Lawrence Reed, who was arrested for the crime, had 72 prior arrests that include 8 felony convictions and 7 misdemeanors, according to the White House. I wonder why cops didn't shoot that motherfucker. The victim, 26-year-old Bethany McGee, survived the attack but is now fighting for her life with horrific burns, the White House said in a statement. In a court on Monday, Mr. Reed yelled 3 times in succession, "I'm guilty," after the judge warned he could receive a life sentence for charges that include committing a terrorist attack, according to reports from inside the courtroom. The White House has sought to blame the incident on Democrats' policies on crime, casting them as soft. Democrats' policies on crime are fucking soft. Fuck the Democrats. Both the state of Illinois and the city of Chicago are led by Democrats, and President Donald Trump is currently seeking to withhold federal funds from Illinois over its elimination of cash bail, where an arrested person posts a sum of money to be released from jail before trial. The suspect was walking free because of the radical, dangerous no cash bail law proudly signed by Governor J.B. Pritzker and celebrated by Chicago's Defund the Police Mayor Brandon Johnson, the White House said in a statement released on Tuesday. Mayor Johnson said in a statement that the attack was a tragic incident and the mayor's prayers are with the victim and her family. Yeah, well, fuck you and fuck your prayers, Johnson. Mr. Reed, 50, has a history of mental illness and had been arrested 72 times since he turned 18, according to a Chicago affiliate of the BBC's partner, CBS News. In August, he was charged with aggravated battery for allegedly hitting a social worker, and after his arrest was released with electronic monitoring against prosecutors' objections. The attack against Miss McGee happened while she was minding her own business and reading her phone, prosecutors said. According to the criminal complaint, she was approached by Mr. Reed arriving from the back of the train car, who then doused her with gasoline before he ran. How did he even get gasoline onto the train car? Fuck that complete retarded nonsense. As he chased to the complete side, Mr. Reed ignited the rest of the liquid in the bottle and set Miss McGee on fire. Footage of the incident appeared to show Mr. Reed watching Miss McGee as she rolled on the floor, engulfing in flames, attempting to extinguish the fire. Last week, Mayor Johnson said the attack should never have happened, characterizing it as an absolute failure of our criminal justice as well as our mental health institutions. He said the suspect clearly faced mental health challenges and presented a danger to himself and the community. Yeah, well, even if he is mentally ill, he should be executed. Someone should kill that motherfucker. Forget about treating him. Fucking eliminate the problem. As a county commissioner, Johnson in 2020 introduced a non-binding resolution to redirect funds from police and jails to other public services, but we're running for mayor in 2023. He promised not to cut police spending. Okay, so how come you don't talk about things like that, Mike? How come you don't talk about stories like this guy Lawrence Reed setting some young woman on fire and he having a history of like 72 prior arrests? How come you don't talk about other news stories like that black asshole that fucking asshole who stabbed Irina what's her name? Her name is Irina something. Irina Zaruska, I think it was. She was from Ukraine. Yeah, Irina Zarutska. And her murderer was DeCarlos Dejan Brown Jr. How come you don't talk about stories like that, Mike? How come you're only talking about all those... How come everything you talk about involves white people somehow annoying or victimizing black people, but you don't talk about the things black people do to white people or black people do to other black people? How come you don't talk about that, Mike? Sheesh, Josh needs help with everything. Can't find anything without me. Okay, let me read again. Come support Southlake students in our fight to end racism and stand with victims of police brutality, it said, alongside a drawing of 3 fists raised in the air, 1 black, 1 white, and 1 shade in between. But by the time Nikki hit publish on the Facebook post on the evening of May 31st, the national conversation began following Floyd's death. But by the time Nikki hit publish on the Facebook post on the evening of May 31st, okay. But by the time Nikki hit publish on the Facebook post on the evening of May 31st, the national conversation following Floyd's death had already begun to shift. Although most protests that spring had been peaceful, some had gotten ugly as police crying out loud. But by the time Nikki hit publish on the Facebook post on the evening of May 31st, the national conversation following Floyd's death had already begun to shift. Although most protests that spring had been peaceful, some had gotten ugly as police and riot gear clashed with Black Lives Matter activists. Images of broken out storefronts and businesses on fire dominated cable news coverage. Amid the chaos, Trump fired off a tweet calling protesters thugs. They are. Fuck those assholes. And said, when the looting starts, the shooting starts. During a speech from the Rose Garden the day after Nikki published her Facebook post, the president threatened deploy the U.S. military to quell the unrest. I am your president of law and order and an ally of all peaceful protesters, he said during his speech. But in recent days, our nation has been gripped by professional anarchists, violent mobs, arsonists, looters, criminals, rioters, Antifa, and others. As he was speaking, D.C. police fired tear gas into a crowd of peaceful demonstrators outside the White House to clear a path for Trump to pose outside a church while holding a Bible. The president's message seemed to take root in Southlake. As Nikki's protest flyer spread widely on social media, so did rumors warning that her demonstration might turn violent. Some residents were panicking over a May 30 tweet from an anonymous user that called for activists to attack homes in Southlake and other wealthy Dallas area suburbs. Despite the post's dubious authenticity, it had come from an account named Antifa Lockhart. The tweet had some Southlake residents on edge. One man wrote on Facebook that business owners should be prepared to exercise their Second Amendment rights. Yeah, they should. Fuck you, Mike, for even saying that they shouldn't, even suggesting that they shouldn't. At Nikki's rally, commenting on that same post, Leah Wamsgans, the wife of Southlake's former mayor Andy Wamsgans, said there was no hope of changing the mind of any Black Lives Matter activists. Sadly, they need to die, Wamsgans wrote, but they would still vote. Well, she's right about the second part. Democrats are known for using dead people to vote in elections. Mayor Laura Hill had seen the panic building online, and she was worried. More than a year after recording the promotional video, students and promising to confront racism, Hill released a statement suggesting that Nikki's Black Lives Matter rally was not the way to do it. Holding the demonstration at Town Square near so many businesses was a mistake, Hill wrote, warning that people bent on violence might come from out of town to cause destruction. The city always allows all groups to gather peacefully in our public parks. It is their right, and I support the students' desire to be heard, she wrote. But as mayor and a mother, I cannot in good conscience tell you to send your child. Yes, we will take every precaution within our ability, but our families want guarantees that their children will be safe. There are none. Behind the scenes, Hill worked to get the demonstration canceled or relocated, believing that the outspoken Black mother, Robin Cornish, might hold some sway over the student activists. Hill texted her days ahead at the rally asking if she might be able to convince Nikki and the other students to change course. Maybe the students could do a virtual event. Virtual event, Hill suggested, or film another video at the city's expense. Cornish thought the mayor was being hysterical. In my heart, she wrote to Hill, I just don't see it becoming violent on Saturday. From your lips to God's ears, Hill wrote back, it's over for me if anyone gets hurt. On the top of the protest, several town square shop owners boarded up their windows as city leaders held their breath. Nikki and other demonstrators began to gather on the lawn outside town hall. Raven Rawl, home from college for the summer, came with some friends and a stack of homemade signs, including one that read, "Stop pretending your racism is patriotism." Michelle Moore came too, nervous about the potential for violence, but wanting to show her support for students of color. In total, more than 1,000 people attended, with Southlake police escorting them. They marched through the upscale shopping districts, chanting "No justice, no peace," and "Say his name, George Floyd." Fuck George Floyd. At one point, while standing under a gazebo overlooking the crowd, Nikki grabbed the bullhorn and made clear that this movement wasn't just about police violence. It was about demanding racial justice right here in Southlake, including at Carroll. We fight so that our children won't have to feel the same way we do now, unsafe and unheard. Toward the end of the rally, Mayor Hill stepped forward and addressed the crowd. Shouting into the bullhorn, she challenged everyone to turn their anger into real action. Look in the mirror and ask yourself, what did I do? Was this just another year that went by? Same complaints, same disappointments, same unhappiness? Or will this be a year when you step up and say, I'm willing to do more? A woman in the crowd shouted, "You step up!" Someone else yelled for Hill to say, "Black Lives Matter." Instead, the mayor issued a challenge. All lives matter, and that includes Black lives. Instead, the mayor issued a challenge. For real change, you must challenge yourself. You must get off the keyboard and take a seat at the table. Several people in the crowd groaned. Why did you discourage us from coming then? Another woman fired back. The rest of the mayor's comments were drowned out with boos. Nikki stood to the side smiling. For her and her friends, the protest was a huge affirming win. 1,000 people marching for racial justice in Southlake, Texas. The crowd had been passionate but peaceful. Nobody was hurt, no businesses were damaged. In that moment, it seemed to Nikki as if real lasting change might be possible. Lots of people were feeling that way in the early days of what some had begun calling America's racial reckoning. It was a season of reflection, a time to confront injustice, both historical and present, and to find ways to make things right. The town square protest caught the attention of Anya Kushwaha, a 2016 Carroll graduate who, like a lot of college students, had come home to stay with her parents in Southlake after the pandemic shuttered university campuses that spring. As the daughter of an immigrant from India, Anya had plenty of memories of Carroll classmates treating her poorly because of her ethnicity. Whether it was the volleyball teammates who joked about her smelling like stinky curry, the girl who made a Facebook post mocking her excessive body hair, or the Christian kids who warned that her father was going to hell because he was a Hindu. During a lesson on the Holocaust in 5th grade, Kushwaha remembers a social studies teacher making the class line up and then pointing out the few people who would have been sent to gas chambers. It wasn't until she went away to college that Kushwaha began to realize how much she'd been traumatized by those daily experiences. So much of myself, my identity, my personality had to be killed in order to survive there. It's suffocating, but you don't realize how suffocating it truly is until you leave that environment. Yeah, well, I've haven't told many people this. I've told a few, but I'm white, I'm straight, and I'm male, and it hasn't happened recently, but I remember probably about close to 15 years ago now. Yeah, pretty close. Close to 15 years ago now or so. I was working at a temp at some warehouse. I believe it was somewhere in San Bernardino. It was a warehouse. I was doing temp staffing, and because I'm kind of a loner and I'm quiet and I usually keep to myself, a couple of my coworkers, most of whom were Hispanic, made a joke about me coming to work one day and shooting the place up and telling me to let them know if I was going to do that so they wouldn't be there that day. So, yeah, that kind of thing can happen to white people too. It doesn't just happen to black people. It doesn't just happen to other people of color, like this girl of Indian ancestry. Okay? So it can happen to anybody. That's why, and when they said that to me, I didn't do anything except laugh it off and then go about my day. I didn't make any complaints about it. I could have, but I didn't. That's why she found it so inspiring to see current high school students speaking up. After attending the rally, Kushwaha, who had just graduated from the University of Southern California with a degree in non-governmental organizations and social change, started texting with a few other former high school classmates who were also home from college. Initially, their plan was just to write a letter calling on Carroll officials to take a firm public stance against racism. But after looping in more alumni such as Raven Roll and current students including Nikki Olahay, the plan morphed into something much bigger. On July 6, 2020, the Southlake Anti-Racism Coalition, or SARC, went live on Instagram with the stated mission of pushing for tangible, enduring, anti-racist change in Southlake Carroll ISD. Over the next several days, Kushwaha and her fellow student activists published dozens of anonymous accounts of racism, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, and homophobia that had been reported to them by Carroll students and alumni, making the case that discrimination at Carroll was even worse than district administrators had realized. Soon more student testimonials were flowing into their inbox. Within days, Sark had collected more than 300 anonymous accounts. I have been called a dirty Jew and have had formal friends hail Hitler in front of me. I used to wear his job. I was referred to as having a terrorist hat. My headscarf was pulled off my head one day. I told a female teacher and she did nothing. Somebody in a class of mine said, "Why do faggots deserve rights?" And nobody said anything against it. I was too scared to say anything because I didn't want to out myself. This town needs change. Kushwaha and other students knew the district diversity council had been working on the cultural competence action plan, but they wanted to push Carroll to go further and move faster. 11 days after their first post, Sark published a list of 17 demands the group wanted implemented immediately at Carroll and addressed the letter to both the school district and the broader Southlake community. Number 1 on their list, a demand for the school board to formally declare that Black Lives Matter. All lives matter, and that includes Black lives. The students also called on the district to require all employees to pass implicit bias screenings to weed out bigoted educators, to study and overhaul the curriculum to prevent the propagation of white supremacist and Eurocentric views and social studies courses, and to impose a ban on racist imagery, including the Confederate flag, from all district facilities. The letter generated instant blowback on social media, but one demand, number 16 on the list, was getting more attention than the rest. Nope. It called on Carroll to get rid of armed school resource officers and to replace them with terrorists and social workers, making yourself an easy target for a mass shooting. Wonder if they're still doing that. Essentially, to defund the police, another rallying cry during that year of racial reckoning. Getting rid of officers whose sole job is to protect the school from threats, either from outside the school or within the school itself, is fucking retarded. Therapists and social workers. When Russell Maryland, the ex-cowboy who'd volunteered to serve on the District Diversity Council, read the demand letter, especially the part about defunding police in a conservative town like Southlake, he thought, that's going to cause some problems. Maryland would be proven right. The demands were like gasoline on the flames of fear and resentment that had begun to flicker with Nikki's protest. Afterwards, Sark was inundated with angry messages and comments accusing the group, which at the time was made up of about a dozen high school students and recent graduates, of being radical left-wing extremists who wanted to destroy America. In a lengthy Facebook post calling on his fellow Southlake residents to stand strong against Sark, former Mayor Andy Wamsgans called the student activist group a little cartel of agitators and knuckleheads, and denounced their demands as a bucket of trash. And as for the central problem that Sark was striving to address, Wamsgans wrote that the notion of a systemic racism was a fairy tale that had already been thoroughly debunked. In another Facebook post about the demands, a former Republican state lawmaker shared her theory that the National Black Lives Matter organization was being funded by America's foreign adversaries, and that the people behind Sark were probably from places like North Korea, Russia, or China. Hey Mike, how come you haven't said anything about the fact that a bunch of Black Lives Matters leadership has been proven to have committed fraud and to have taken money illegally and used it for purposes that had nothing to do with their stated aims? They spent a lot of the money that they collected on cars and houses and going on vacations and a bunch of other crap, and you're not saying anything about it. Black Lives Matter is a fucking sham of an organization. It exists just to perpetuate fraud and to scam money off of people. That's what Black Lives Matter is all about. Kushwaha, 22 at the time, was disturbed but also bemused by the attacks. It was either, these are kids who don't know what they're talking about, or what it was, these are adults who have been hired by George Soros and are orchestrating the decline of our government. For their part, Carroll leaders responded to Sark's demands with public statements promising to complete the work of addressing racism that had begun in 2018 behind the scenes. Meanwhile, school district officials, including Michelle Moore and the leaders of the District Diversity Council, agreed to meet with Kushwaha and the other student activists, a decision that would end up further inflaming outrage among conservatives. The goal was to show the students that the district was willing to listen to their perspectives, but also to convince them that the diversity plan would go a long way toward addressing their concerns. I still felt at that point that if we could just get the CCAP before the school board, then we could get it passed and start the work of refining and implementing it, Moore said. But on social media, people began to conflate the work of the District Diversity Council with Sark's demand letter. They pointed to the meeting between school officials and Sark as evidence that the DDC had been infiltrated by a far-left activist group bent on defunding police and tearing down Southlake. At that point, the actual contents of the Cultural Competence Action Plan were unknown to most people in town, but now some had begun to associate it with progressive politics and Black Lives Matter activists. That, Maryland observed, was the beginning of the doom of the CCAP, the point where everything was politicized. And when things are politicized in this town or this region or this country, then all bets are off. At last, in July 2020, nearly 2 years after the first Bible N-word video, after hundreds of students' testimonials, Taylor-Field meetings with parents, public forums, and promises from city and school leaders, the Cultural Competence Action Plan was unveiled to the people of Southlake and set to go before the school board for an early August vote. The 34-page draft document called for mandatory cultural sensitivity training for all of Carroll's students and teachers, a top-to-bottom review of district curricula to embed culturally responsive lessons at every grade level, a formal process for reporting and tracking incidents of racial bullying, an audit to ensure student clubs are welcoming and inclusive, regardless of race, gender, or sexuality. The creation of a new LGBTQ focus group to foster dialogue at the high school, and changes to the code of conduct to more explicitly spell out consequences for acts of discrimination. The plan proposed an overhaul of Carroll's hiring practices to recruit more teachers of color and the creation of a new administrative position with a six-figure salary. Director of Equity and Inclusion. Promoting equity and inclusion is big, big, big fucking business. I'm so glad that a bunch of these positions are being axed. I hope they never come back. To oversee the efforts across the district, the CCAP also introduced many residents in Southlake to the increasingly prevalent term microaggressions, the catch-all way of describing racist statements and actions that might make a student of color feel disparaged, but are less obvious than, say, shouting the N-word on camera. A common example at Carroll, a white student telling an academically gifted black classmate that she's the whitest black girl I know. The District Diversity Council wanted to create a system to report and track those types of incidents. The way we saw it, this is a fairly basic plan, Russell Maryland said, just a basic plan of human decency, empathy, kindness, inclusion, and understanding about other cultures. It landed like a bomb. Moore's phone was buzzing with notifications all week as her inbox filled up with messages from constituents and neighbors. I'm against the diversity plan, one friend wrote, where this is a home issue. Parents should be the ones training their kids and not the school. That same day, an anonymous email blast started circulating, falsely claiming that Moore and the other trustees were planning to force gender choices, LGBTQ, etc. on our kids as young as pre-K. The volume of text, calls, and emails dwarfed the blowback the district had gotten after the N-word video nearly 2 years earlier. Early on the morning of July 31st, 3 days before the school board was slated to vote on the diversity plan, Moore's phone vibrated. Do we have a plan to counter this crusade against the CCAP? The text message from Ronald Smith, a member of the DDC who had been elected to the city council a year earlier. Smith was the black father of biracial girls who'd brought up Carroll's motto, Projected Tradition, Smith was the black father of biracial girls who brought up Carroll's motto, protect the tradition, at the school board meeting after their first viral video in 2018, and had asked rhetorically what tradition the district was protecting. Smith, a conservative himself, didn't love every detail in the CCAP, told Moore, but he believed it moved the district in the right direction and deserved to be defended. I don't want these people to think that they've won, Smith wrote to Moore. If they feel emboldened, we'll never get anything done. Some members of the school board and city leaders had begun floating the idea of delaying the vote to allow time for more community feedback. Moore agreed the plan needed to be refined, but also agreed with Smith, who warned in a follow-up text that if school board trustees cater to the mob, any hope of passing the CCAP goes away forever. I can't let that happen, Moore responded. I will be letting so many kids down. On the night of August 3rd, more than 100 people signed up to speak during the virtual school board meeting. Every one of them wishing to comment on the diversity plan. The first speaker was Andrew Yeager, a white father of 3 Carroll students who called on the board to reject the CCAP. It is a political agenda to fully change our great school. It's an attack on our tradition of excellence, which has been a unifying force for all dragons and students of every race, religion, and ethnicity. The next speaker complained that the CCAP added protections for LGBTQ students, which he said would unfairly punish students who hold a biblical worldview. That opinion was echoed by a speaker warning that an anti-family and anti-Christian agenda has been inserted to promote homosexuality at Carroll, and it fucking has. Another speaker, an old friend of Moore's family, warned that tracking student microaggressions would lead to hundreds of daily false reports and turn neighbor on neighbor, friend on friend, and provide a means to eliminate adversaries. Yep. But most of the speakers, including Anya Kushwaha, Nikki Olahay, and several other SARC members, supported the plan, which gave Moore the impression that despite the outrage, she still had the backing of many, if not most residents. After nearly 2 hours, it was the board president's turn to speak. Moore opened by thanking the students and parents who'd come forward with stories of discrimination. Beginning 2 years earlier, she thanked the members of the DDC for collectively putting in thousands of hours of work to make Carroll better, and then she apologized for failing them all. If only she had done a better job communicating with the public about what the plan was about, maybe things wouldn't have gotten so heated, she said. I would never imagined what has happened in this community the last 2 days over a plan that was really trying to create an environment that was safe and welcoming. But failing to act would be a bigger failure, Moore said. If we don't take action tonight, we really have to think about what message are we sending to the kids and victims of discrimination, and have come and talked to us over and over again. With that, former board president and fellow DDC volunteer Sherry Mills motioned, while choking back tears for the board, to receive the CCAP and authorize the superintendent to begin implementation. Another member seconded Mills' motion, but then 3 others unmuted their microphones and asked to pump the brakes, raising arguments like, shouldn't we spend more time studying the plan before we vote on it? Not every board member got to serve on the Diversity Council. And what about all the messages from concerned parents? This is the most important, not just one of the important things, the most important thing that any of us will ever work on, board member Eric Lennon said, and I want to get it right. I don't want to have division in our community and have people upset and yelling at each other. After nearly an hour of debate, Moore proposed a middle ground, one that she and fellow board members had begun debating in a chain of text messages prior to the meeting. Why not just vote to receive the CCAP, but hold off on implementing it, then schedule board workshops to keep refining it, allowing time for the broader community to weigh in? That sounded like a good idea, a few of the other trustees said, but one member, Matt Bryant, the trustee who had asked Russell Maryland to join the diversity committee, had deep concerns. You stated the march of progress is slow but unyielding. So if we move at a little slower pace than what you're advising, but in the effort to understand, Bryant said, this should be a 7-0 vote is what this should be. This should be a unanimous vote. Moore and Mills weren't budging. I spent the last 22 months of my life working on this plan, Mills said. I think we owe it to the people who spent the past 2 years of their life to vote tonight. Moore seconded the motion and began to call the roll. Place 1, Michelle Moore, I vote yes. Place 2, Eric Lennon, I don't understand what we're voting on, so I vote no. Place 3, I'm Sherry Mills, yes. Place 4, Matt Bryant, no. Place 5, Danny Gilpin, I vote yes. Place 6, the board's vice president, Todd Carlton, took a deep breath before saying, I vote yes. Place 7, Dave Almond, yes. By a vote of 5-2, the motion passed. Those 5 board members hoped that by simply receiving the diversity plan, rather than acting right away on its recommendations, they could lower the temperature of the debate in town. Instead, the opposite happened. Students of color and LGBTQ teens who shared painful accounts felt betrayed by the board's failure to immediately adopt the plan. As for the adults in the community who saw the CCAP as a threat to their kids, they weren't about to sit back while the school board tinkered around with the fine print. Some of those residents, as one of them would say later, had already started joining an army, and now were preparing to launch a political war. All right, getting ready to start the next chapter of One Day I'll Grow Up and Become a Beautiful Woman. Chapter 5. I first met my husband Paul. Okay, this is one of the longer chapters. Most of the chapters in here were 2 pages. This one is 7. I first met my husband Paul on the sidewalk in Missoula, Montana. I had just finished college and was headed to Idaho with my brother Henry, who would attend graduate school there, and Paul was just about to leave Missoula for culinary school in Vancouver, Canada. It was morning June, hot and sunny. My brother and I had stopped in Montana to visit friends for a few days. It felt like the entire town was out for the Saturday market, and Henry and I were weaving through the crowd. We ran into Paul, the younger brother of my brother's good friend. He introduced us. Paul was stoned and smiling wide, looking like he'd never had a care in the world. He held out a bag of Sour Patch Kids and Swedish Fish and asked if I wanted some. I'm in love with Paul Maxwell, I said to my brother as he walked away. A year later, I returned to Missoula to live, and so did Paul, and through mutual friends we met again at a bar. He had thick blonde hair and button-down shirts, and when I first laid eyes on him, I told my friend that he was too clean-cut to ever be interested in me. A girl who worked for a wilderness trail crew and did not shave. But when I heard he'd said I was cute, I found out his address and left wildflowers and an empty beer can on his porch, along with my phone number. On our first date, we drank a pitcher of beer and played pool in a western bar. And after midnight, we walked across town toward the house he lived in with friends. I still remember the glow of the neighborhood street, the whistle of the trains throughout the valley, and the feeling that he and I were contained in a bubble with nothing and no one else. I told him I would be a writer. He told me he loved fishing on the Encampment River in southern Wyoming. He'd been born in Colorado, but when his parents divorced, he'd eventually left the West with his mother, and we realized the small town where I'd camped every summer of my childhood was the same coastal Maine town he'd ended up in as a teen. That night, we discovered other ways we circled each other over the years, other places we'd unknowingly been within arm's reach of each other. Our first days together, In our first days together, I learned that my initial impression of a clean-cut man had been off. Paul rented an attic bedroom with only a trapdoor access and a small house on the railroad tracks, and he washed his clothes in the river because he enjoyed the slowness of it. All his belongings fit into an old camp trunk: a pair of wool pants, a wool jacket, fishing clothes and equipment, a set of chef's knives his grandmother had gifted him, and a collection of CDs. A few weeks into our relationship, when I picked him up at his house because he had no car or driver's license and instead preferred to walk or ride his bike, he put that trunk into the back of my car without a word. I lived in a cabin 30 minutes outside the city, and as we drove along the Blackfoot River, I asked him why he'd brought the trunk. You said you needed a new roommate, he said simply. It was true. My college friend had decided to return home to Alaska, and I wouldn't be able to cover rent myself. I didn't know how to respond, so I said nothing, and in this way, my husband moved in with me that day, and he never left my side again. Sometime in that first month together, we were once again out late at a bar where a Western cover band played. We were among many friends, his older brother included. And when we leaned in close to reach our drinks, his brother said to me, "Where will you get married, Montana or New Hampshire?" I didn't miss a beat. Didn't think. We won't get married. Didn't think. We've known each other secretly scarcely a month. I just answered the question. New Hampshire. It didn't happen for over 7 years, but it did happen eventually. Just as I said it would. One summer, we packed our belongings, our cat, Neva, and our fish, and we left that western city for my home. We got married a few weeks later on the lake island of my childhood. Now, I sometimes look back on those first days and try to implant the knowledge of the future into those young selves of ours. I think of all the decisions that might have been altered had we known where they would lead. Recently, my brother-in-law asked me if I remembered why we had ever left the West all those years ago. I do, and a part of it was so easy to explain. I had wanted to be closer to my aging grandmother and to hear her stories before she passed, but the other part is so much harder. My paternal grandmother was the daughter of Swedish immigrants, and she grew up first in a tenement housing and then in a small home her father had built on the outskirts of Boston. She could play the piano by ear, and she loved to read Keats and Tennyson and to ponder her deep spirituality. Her father was a mill worker, her mother stayed at home, and her spinster maternal aunts were maids for a wealthy man on the Boston shore who shot himself in the head the day the stock market crashed. Wow. There would be no money for her to go to college. She had a paternal aunt, though, who lived in Wellesley, where the public school awarded its top student a full scholarship to attend Wellesley College. My grandmother moved in with her aunt for her senior year of high school and worked hard and won that scholarship. She continued living with her aunt during her 4 years of college, and every summer she found a job to help pay for expenses. One year that job was as a waitress at a lakeside resort in New Hampshire. My grandfather loved to tell the story of meeting my grandmother, which was simply that he had gone for dinner with a friend and been introduced to her and had been in love at first sight. After that, he transferred from the University of Vermont to Babson College in Wellesley while my grandmother finished her studies, and then they married and settled in my grandfather's hometown of Laconia, and within a year they moved up to the road to Guilford. My grandfather's studies combined with his natural talents made him an excellent businessman, and with the help of my grandmother, the candy and ice cream shop he had inherited from his father flourished. They had children, built a house in Guilford that overlooked the lake, and in the 1950s bought a boathouse, and the island property that would become our family's sanctuary. When the local Boy Scout camp had an old cabin they wanted to get rid of, my grandfather bought it, put it on runners, towed it out across the water, and repurposed it for a family cabin. His own father around this time was a state senator who also loved the lake and hated to see the development occurring on its shores. He spent his time in office advocating for public parks on the water, which today, according to the way my father tells it, is the reason for the one and only state park on that entire lake. The land my father purchased faces directly east, so that the sun beams straight on in the early morning and disappears by 4 o'clock, even in the height of summer. My father spent his childhood summers there, while my grandfather commuted by boat back and forth to the shore. My grandmother, unaccustomed to the wealth my grandfather had grown up in, was committed to sharing their good fortune and always encouraged guests to join them on the lake. One of these was a friend in Boston who now had a husband and 5 children. She and her family would travel up to New Hampshire to join my father's family for 2 weeks every summer, and she would turn out to be my maternal grandmother, which means that my mother and father, destined for a bitter divorce, would swim and play in the sand together for years as children. By the time I was a child, the cabin was mouse and spider infested, with floors sagging and moss growing on the roof. Going out there was always an unplanned surprise, at least from my perspective. My father and stepmother would come to the house full of kids and tell us to find our swimsuits and get in the van. They'd drive to the grocery store and they'd go in while we waited in the parking lot. In the van, we would fight and yell and throw things out the windows at strangers. We were a pack of wolves, and occasionally we were reprimanded by the adults. Walking past and occasionally we were reprimanded by adults walking past. Eventually my mother and stepmother would return to us with loads of paper shopping bags, and we would drive to the Guilford boathouse my grandfather had bought all those years ago. My father still keeps that boathouse, and sometimes, on our hardest days in Guilford, I would go out there just for the feeling it gave me, that an entrance to some other world was still possible. Back then, the family boat was for the whole family. My grandparents, my aunt, uncle, and my father. We had a few different ones over the years. They were always clunky and used, the kind that required my father to spend a lot of time looking the motor over and tinkering with the various pumps. They also frequently broke down in the middle of the lake, and one of them even caught fire and sank. Wow. I never quite knew when we'd gotten a replacement, but they were all essentially the same, old and blue, with a flat seatless bow encircled by a low, weak metal bar at its perimeter, and an echoey crawl chamber below, ripped up driver and passenger seats, plus a few more seats in the stern. My stepsister and I would ride on the bow, clinging for our lives to a rope while my father gunned it across the dark water. A few things are true about our time out there as children. We were hungry and generally not allowed to enter the kitchen to find food. So, my memories are clouded with stolen, unripe plums. We were thirsty, sunburned, and unsupervised. But also, we were the luckiest children in the entire world. Lucky for we had no concept of the privilege that had got us to this place. Not only have landed there, but to actually say this was ours. Its magical world so close to yet so completely removed from our troubled lives. Arriving was like crossing through a door to another dimension, one where my father would laugh heartily, and he and my stepmother would sit with us late into the night talking, reminiscing. Mornings I alone would rise when my father did and follow him to the water, holding onto his shoulders while he dipped under and swam out toward the buoys. Days I would sit on the beach and look toward the mainland and wonder at the impossibility of that life going on there while we were down here inside this perfect snow globe which is missing only the presence of my mother. I hate when white people talk about their privilege. Anybody can be privileged regardless of their race. When my husband and I fell in love, we would stay up late in the cabin we rented in Montana, and I would tell him dreamily about the island, how there was a water spring and a lake so big and so full of secret pockets, how it was not perfect, the cabin was falling down, and when I was a teenager, my brother's best friends had drowned there one night when they'd paddled out to see the moon in May, the canoe rotting and the water still cold. And still, how maybe one day Paul and I could winter the island together, just the two of us, watching through ice in and ice out. When we moved east, we planned to go to Maine and then maybe Vermont and then to northern New Hampshire, but I wouldn't commit to any of it. You're orbiting, the wise men who performed our wedding ceremony said to us, and he was right. We were orbiting ever closer to the lake, and I didn't say yes to any place to live until we were there, right there at its shore. We were in Guilford, the town that would become our downfall. We felt from the start that we didn't fit in, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the lake. It had too many speedboats. The land was too bought up by wealthy out-of-staters. There was scarcely any public access, but it was the place I belonged. When I looked out at it, I felt something so vital, something so beyond words, that it almost hurt to look, and I would wonder if some thread of my history that had been looking out at this view for hundreds of years accounted for such a feeling. Now I can hardly bear to look at the lake, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay. So I'm done with that. I'm done with the both chapters.